slouched at her kitchen table, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. Her Portland apartment was quiet, save for the occasional hum of passing cars outside. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, highlighting the scattered papers and half-empty coffee mugs that cluttered the table. The deadline for her latest design project was 5 p.m. today, but Rachel hadn't started. She wasn't proud of this moment, though it wasn't unfamiliar. Rachel had a history of putting things off until the last minute, convincing herself each time that she worked better under pressure. She told herself the same thing now as she refreshed her email for the third time in 10 minutes, hoping for, she didn't know what, a reprieve, an extension, divine inspiration, anything but the growing anxiety that gnawed at her. At 28, Rachel had everything going for her, or so it seemed. She was a talented graphic designer working for a boutique creative agency that specialized in branding for eco-conscious companies. Her work had been featured in national campaigns, and her creative eye was often praised by clients and colleagues alike. On paper, Rachel was the picture of success, but beneath the accolades and compliments was a constant nagging feeling. Every time a new project landed on her desk, she felt the familiar tug of fear. What if this time What if everyone realizes I'm not as good as they think I am? And so, instead of diving in, Rachel stalled. She would scroll through Pinterest for inspiration or reorganize her desk. She would make another cup of coffee or clean her kitchen counters for the third time that day. The cycle always played out the same way. First came the avoidance. Rachel would tell herself she wasn't in the right headspace to work yet. "I'll start after lunch," she'd say. Then, after lunch, "I'll just take a quick walk to clear my head." By the time she finally sat down to work, the hours had slipped away, and the pressure of the looming deadline became unbearable. Next came the panic. As the deadline approached, Rachel would scramble to throw something together, fueled by adrenaline and sheer desperation. It wasn't her best work. How could it be, given the circumstances? But somehow she always managed to pull through, submitting her projects just in time. Finally, there was the guilt. Once the adrenaline wore off, Rachel was left with a mix of exhaustion and she knew she could have done better if she'd started. She knew her clients and colleagues deserved better, and she knew she couldn't keep operating this way without it catching up to her. That's exactly what happened last week. Rachel's boss, Elaine, had pulled her aside after a client presentation. "Rachel, the work was solid, but it felt rushed," Elaine had said, her tone firm but not unkind. "You're so talented. I know you can do better. Let's make sure this doesn't become a pattern, okay?" Rachel nodded, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She wanted to tell Elaine about the sleepless night she'd spent finishing the project, about the hours of second-guessing and self-doubt that had paralyzed her, but she didn't. Instead, she promised herself she'd do better next time. But now, sitting at her kitchen table with another project due in a matter of hours, Rachel realized she didn't know how to break the cycle. Rachel's procrastination wasn't just affecting her work, it was seeping into every aspect of her life. Her friendships were strained because she was constantly canceling plans to catch up on last-minute work. Her sleep schedule was a mess, and her health was suffering from the stress and late nights. She couldn't help but imagine a worst-case scenario. What if her procrastination cost her this job? What if her reputation as a creative professional was tarnished? The thought was almost too much to bear, and yet here she was, stuck in the same pattern. That evening, as she aimlessly scrolled through Instagram, Rachel stumbled upon a quote that stopped her in her tracks. "Procrastination is the thief of time." It was an ad for a local workshop titled "Breaking the Cycle: How to Overcome Procrastination and Reclaim Your Life," led by Dr. Vincent Vale. Intrigued, Rachel clicked the link and read more about the workshop. The description seemed to speak directly to her. Procrastination isn't about laziness, it's about fear. Learn how to identify the root causes of your procrastination and develop the tools to overcome it. Rachel hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to dismiss the idea. Therapy wasn't something she had considered before, and the idea of opening up to a stranger about her struggles felt daunting. But another part of her, the part that was tired of feeling stuck, knew she needed help. Before she could talk herself out of it, Rachel filled out the contact form on Dr. Vale's website and scheduled her first session. Rachel arrived at Dr. Vale's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, her umbrella dripping water onto the hardwood floor as she stepped inside. The receptionist greeted her warmly and offered her a seat in the cozy waiting room. Rachel glanced around, taking in the bookshelves lined with psychology texts and the soft hum of instrumental music playing overhead. Despite the inviting atmosphere, her stomach churned with anxiety. When Dr. Vale opened the door and called her name, Rachel was struck by his calm demeanor. He was tall and slightly gray at the temples, exuding a sense of reassurance that made her feel slightly less apprehensive. "Hi, Rachel. It's great to meet you." "Come on in," he said, gesturing toward his office. The office itself was equally inviting, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and a small fountain in the corner that added a soothing backdrop of trickling water. Rachel sat down, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag as Dr. Vale settled into his chair across from her. "So," he began, his tone gentle but direct, "what brings you here today?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to start. Finally, she sighed and said, "I guess I just feel stuck. I keep procrastinating, and it's starting to mess up my work, my sleep, my whole life, really. I don't know why I do it, and I don't know how to stop." Dr. Vale nodded, his expression thoughtful. Procrastination is something so many people struggle with, and it's not as simple as just getting better at time management. There's often a deeper reason behind it. "Can you tell me about a recent time you procrastinated and how it played out?" Rachel recounted her most recent project, how she had put it off until the last minute, worked through the night, and delivered something she wasn't proud of. "I tell myself every time that I'll do it differently, but when the next project comes around, I fall into the same trap. It's like I can't help it," she said, frustration evident in her voice. Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly. "That's actually very common. Procrastination often stems from fear of failure, fear of imperfection, or even fear of success. Sometimes it's our way of avoiding discomfort or protecting ourselves from the possibility of not measuring up to our own high expectations. Does that resonate with you?" Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds about right. I guess I'm always worried that what I create won't be good enough, so I avoid starting altogether." Over the next few sessions, Dr. Vale guided Rachel through an exploration of her past experiences with work, creativity, and perfectionism. Through their conversations, Rachel began to recognize patterns that had been present since childhood. "I was always the smart kid growing up," Rachel explained during one session. "Teachers and my parents had such high expectations for me. If I got anything less than an A, it felt like the end of the world. So I started waiting until the last minute to do things, because if I didn't do well, I could always say, 'Well, I didn't really try.' It was easier than risking failure when I actually gave it my all." Dr. Vale listened carefully. "That's a powerful insight, Rachel. It sounds like procrastination became a shield for you, a way to protect yourself from the fear of not being perfect. But that shield has its downsides, doesn't it?" Rachel nodded. "Definitely. It's not protecting me anymore. It's holding me back." As they delved deeper into her procrastination patterns, Rachel faced moments of resistance. Changing her habits felt daunting, especially when the fear of failure still loomed large. "I don't know if I can do this," Rachel admitted during one particularly challenging session. "It's so ingrained in me to put things off, and honestly, part of me feels like I work better under pressure." Dr. Vale smiled knowingly. "That's a common myth. The truth is, while adrenaline can give you a temporary boost, last-minute work is usually less thoughtful and more stressful. The goal isn't to force yourself to work, it's productive and manageable." He introduced Rachel to the concept of structured procrastination, encouraging her to set small, realistic goals rather than tackling an entire project all at once. Instead of telling yourself you need to finish the whole thing, start by committing to just 10 minutes of work. Often starting is the hardest part. At first, Rachel struggled with this approach. She found herself slipping back into old habits, avoiding tasks until the last minute. But with Dr. Vale's guidance, she began experimenting with new strategies, such as using a timer to work in short bursts and breaking her projects into smaller, less intimidating steps. One evening, Rachel sat at her desk, staring at the blank canvas of her latest project. Normally, she would have avoided starting, convincing herself she needed to be in the right mood to work. But this time, she set a timer for 10 minutes and told herself, just work until the timer goes off. Then you can stop if you want to. To her surprise, once she started, the work began to flow. By the time the timer went off, she was so immersed in the project that she kept going. That night, for the first time in months, Rachel finished her work ahead of schedule. In her next session, she shared her experience with Dr. Vale. "It's weird," she said, "but starting small actually worked. I didn't feel overwhelmed, and I ended up getting more done than I thought I could." Dr. Vale smiled. "That's the power of momentum. Procrastination thrives on avoidance, but once you take that first step, it's much easier to keep going." Rachel's big test came 3 months into her work with Dr. Vale. Her agency landed a prestigious contract with a well-known tech company, and her manager, Elaine, assigned Rachel the lead role on the project. It was a dream opportunity, the kind of project that could cement Rachel's reputation as a top-tier designer. But it also came with high stakes and a tight deadline. The familiar mix of excitement and anxiety coursed through Rachel as Elaine explained the project's parameters. The final design was due in 4 weeks, but the client requested progress updates every week. As she walked back to her desk, Rachel felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. This is it. If I mess this up, everyone will know I'm a fraud. That night, Rachel sat in her apartment staring at her laptop. The brief sat unopened on her screen, and her mind raced with reasons to "I'm too tired now. I'll think more clearly in the morning." She reached for her phone, ready to distract herself with Instagram, when something stopped her. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Vale played in her mind. "Procrastination thrives on avoidance," he had said during their last session. "The longer you delay starting, the bigger and scarier the task feels. The trick is to take one small step, just enough to disrupt the cycle." Rachel set her phone down and opened the project brief. 10 minutes, she told herself, setting a timer. "I'll just read it through and then I can stop." As Rachel read through the client's vision for the project, her anxiety began to ease. She jotted down a few initial ideas, nothing too specific, but enough to spark a flicker of excitement. When the timer went off, she realized she wasn't ready to stop. Instead, she spent another 30 minutes brainstorming and sketching rough concepts. The next morning, Rachel showed up at work with a plan. During her weekly check-in with Elaine, she shared her strategy for breaking the project into smaller milestones. "I want to make sure we're on track every step of the way," she explained. Elaine nodded, clearly impressed by Rachel's proactive approach. The first week went smoothly. Rachel carved out a focused time each day to work on her project, using the Pomodoro technique Dr. Vale had taught her. 25 minutes of focused work, followed by a 5-minute break. The structure kept her from feeling overwhelmed and helped her stay productive without burning out. But as the second week began, Rachel hit a roadblock. One of her concepts wasn't coming together, and she began second-guessing herself. The old fear of failure crept in, whispering, "You're not good enough for this. They're going to hate your work." Rachel felt the familiar urge to avoid the problem altogether. She wanted to close her laptop and binge-watch a sitcom to numb the anxiety. But this time, she did something different. She texted Dr. Vale, "I'm stuck, and I feel like giving up. Any advice?" A few minutes later, his response came through. "Perfectionism is the enemy of progress. Focus on making it good enough for now. You can refine it later." Taking a deep breath, Rachel returned to her desk. Instead of trying to create a flawless design, she focused on completing a rough draft. Good enough, she whispered to herself as she worked. By the end of the second week, Rachel presented her initial concepts. As the meeting approached, her nerves were in full swing. She reminded herself of Dr. Vale's advice. You're not aiming for perfect, you're aiming for progress. To her surprise, the client loved her ideas. This is exactly the direction we were hoping for, one of their executives said. Rachel felt a wave of relief and pride. She wasn't just meeting expectations, she was exceeding them. The momentum from that meeting carried her through the rest of the project. With each milestone, Rachel grew more confident in her ability to manage pressure and stay on track. She continued to break tasks into manageable steps, reminding herself that progress, not perfection, was the goal. On the day of the final presentation, Rachel felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Her designs were polished, and she had rehearsed her pitch multiple times. As she stood before the client's executive team, she felt a familiar flicker of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. Rachel began her presentation with confidence, walking the team through her creative process and explaining how her designs aligned with their vision. She used storytelling techniques to make her work resonate, drawing on lessons she'd learned from her therapy sessions. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. "This is phenomenal work," the client's CEO said. "You've not only captured our brand, but elevated it." That evening, Rachel returned home and opened her journal. She wrote, "Today, I proved to myself that I can break the cycle. Procrastination doesn't define me anymore. It's not about being perfect. It's about starting, staying consistent, and believing in myself." Rachel felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for completing the project, but for the personal growth it represented. She had faced her fears, leaned into the discomfort, and come out stronger on the other side. Rachel sat on her balcony, a mug of tea warming her hands as the cool Portland air wrapped around her. She had done it. The project was finished. The client was thrilled. And for the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment that wasn't overshadowed by exhaustion or regret. She wasn't just relieved the project was over. She was proud of how she had handled it from start to finish. As she reflected on the past few weeks, Rachel realized just how much had changed. Procrastination had once felt like an unavoidable part of her life, a habit so ingrained that she couldn't imagine functioning without it. But now, she saw it for what it was, a defense mechanism, a way of avoiding discomfort and fear. And for the first time, she felt like she had the tools to face those fears head-on. Rachel's approach to work had transformed. She no longer saw deadlines as ominous clouds hanging over her. Instead, they became guideposts, breaking her projects into manageable stages. She had learned to plan ahead, setting realistic milestones and sticking to them. The Pomodoro technique, which once felt like a gimmick, had become a cornerstone of her productivity. The biggest shift, though, was her mindset. Rachel had stopped striving for perfection and started focusing on progress. She learned to appreciate the value of iteration, trusting that her work didn't need to be flawless on the first try. Her newfound confidence didn't go unnoticed. Elaine, her manager, pulled her aside after the final presentation to the client. "Rachel, I've always known you were talented, but this project showed me a whole new side of you. Your preparation, your creativity, your leadership, it was all top-notch. I hope you're as proud of yourself as we are of you." Rachel smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, Elaine. Honestly, I've learned a lot about how to work smarter and manage my time better. It's made a huge difference." Outside of work, Rachel also noticed changes in how she approached her personal life. She no longer cancelled plans with friends at the last minute to cram for deadlines. Instead, she made time for the people she cared about, knowing that balance was essential for her well-being. One weekend, she invited her best friend Lily over for brunch. As they sipped mimosas and caught up, Lily said, "You seem so much lighter these days, Rach. Like you're finally enjoying life again. What's your secret?" Rachel laughed. Honestly, therapy, it helped me realize why I procrastinate and taught me how to stop letting it control me. Turns out, avoiding work because I'm scared of not being perfect wasn't doing me any favors. Lily raised her glass. To progress, not perfection. Dr. Vincent Vale thought about Rachel often, especially when working with other clients struggling with procrastination. In her journey, he saw a clear example of how small, intentional steps could lead to profound change. In a workshop he hosted a month later, Dr. Vale shared Rachel's anonymized story as a case study. Procrastination isn't about laziness, he told the group. It's often about fear, fear of failure, fear of imperfection, or fear of not meeting expectations. The key to overcoming it isn't to push yourself harder, but to understand why it's happening in the first place. He outlined the tools Rachel had used, breaking tasks into manageable steps, using timers to create structure, reframing deadlines as opportunities rather than threats, practicing self-compassion and letting go of perfectionism. Rachel's story reminds us that change doesn't happen overnight, Dr. Vale concluded. It's about progress, small, consistent steps that build momentum over time. And if she can do it, so can you. Rachel's story resonated far beyond her own life. Her journey highlighted a truth that many people needed to hear. Procrastination isn't a character flaw or a sign of laziness. It's a behavior rooted in fear and self-doubt, one that can be unlearned with patience and the right strategies. As Rachel reflected on her transformation, she realized that the tools she had gained weren't just for work, they were for life. She felt equipped to face challenges in all areas, from planning a big vacation she'd been putting off to tackling personal goals like learning to cook new recipes and restarting her fitness routine. One evening, she wrote in her journal, "I'm not perfect, and that's okay. Progress is what matters. I don't need to fear failure because every step I take teaches me something. I'm proud of how far I've come, and I'm excited for what's next." Dr. Vale ended his sessions with Rachel and most of his videos with the same advice: what's one small step you can take today to move forward? He believed in the power of small wins, knowing that momentum often came from the tiniest actions. Speaking directly to his audience, Dr. Vale said, "If procrastination is holding you back, start by reflecting on why. What's the fear or belief underneath it? Then pick one small thing, just one, and do it. Remember, progress isn't about giant leaps. It's about showing up, one step at a time." Rachel's transformation didn't just impact her life, it inspired others around her. At work, she started mentoring younger designers, sharing her journey and the strategies she had learned. She encouraged them to embrace progress over perfection, reminding them that starting was often the hardest part. Rachel's story serves as a powerful reminder that procrastination doesn't have to define us. With self-awareness, practical tools, and the willingness to face our fears, we can break free from the cycle and create lives we're proud of. For Rachel, the journey wasn't just about beating procrastination. It was about reclaiming her time, her confidence, and her joy. And for anyone willing to take the first step, the same transformation is possible.